Living in a small southern town, you get used to the way things are. I grew up as a military brat, so my childhood memories are a blur of packing, unpacking, and getting settled. It had been 7 years since we arrived, and nothing but the grace of God would make me move again. A few years ago, my father got orders to station at a base in the middle of the Mojave. I was only 17 then, but after a few dozen screaming matches, I decided to strike out on my own a little early. I got a part-time job at a cafe, which was enough to rent a little run-down shack a couple of blocks from downtown. As far as I was concerned, I was living the dream. Serving coffee a few hours a week and spending the rest of my time hanging out with friends, listening to music, and drinking. That particular morning started the same as any other. I woke up around noon with a text from Mark to meet me at the cafe. It took me about 2 hours to get up and head over. The sun had just begun its descent as I pushed the door to the cafe open, the bell above tinkling softly. The sound bothered me a little bit, but I couldn't tell why. It seemed to ring a little louder than I was expecting, and gave me this strange drilling sensation inside my head. I ignored the feeling as the smell of slightly stale coffee and pastries washed over me. I saw Mark and Jamie already sat at our usual spot. Mark looked up as I approached, a grin spreading across his face. "Hey, Alex. Sarah should be here soon." "So, what's on the docket today?" I asked as I sat down, stealing a bear claw off Jamie's plate and taking a large bite before he had the chance to protest. Mark's excitement was almost palpable. He was always the one with the big ideas and crazy schemes, which I honestly appreciated. They got us into trouble more often than not, but it beat a day drinking in the Walmart parking lot like everyone else our age. "All right, check this out," Mark said, his eyes gleaming with excitement. "I was talking to my cousin who works for the county. He told me about this old abandoned food processing factory just outside of town. They used to package peaches there." I gave him a skeptical look. "That's your idea? Old canned peaches?" "No, idiot," he scoffed. "They left behind a ton of nitrates and phosphates. I've been doing some reading, and we can use them to make fireworks. I was up all night figuring it out and putting these together." He suddenly opened his backpack to reveal at least a dozen PVC pipes fitted on both ends. "Now that's what I'm talking about," I said, grinning. Sarah walked in, catching the tail end of our conversation. "Sorry I'm late. I had a breakout and had to stop by the pharmacy. Upped my allergy meds. I frickin' hate pollen," she said as I scooted over to make room for her on the bench. "Is there anything you aren't allergic to?" I laughed. She rolled her eyes, ignoring my question. "So what's the plan for today?" Mark, Jamie, and I exchanged knowing glances. "Well," I started, "let's just hope you're not allergic to peaches." We finally managed to pry the side door of the factory off, which broke free from the hinges and smashed against the floor. Stepping inside, the air was thick and rancid as we bounced the beams of our flashlights around the packaging floor. "We should split up," Mark suggested. "Alex, you and Sarah check out the storage rooms for the chemicals. Jamie and I will find the control room and see if we can get the power back on." All of us nodded as we went our separate ways. Sarah and I wandered down the dark hallways, kicking open doors and looking for anything that looked vaguely like chemicals. The corridors were dark and damp, with black mold snaking along the walls like veins. The first few rooms we checked were empty, filled only with dust and the remnants of long-abandoned equipment. Each door creaked as we pushed it open, revealing more decay and desolation. As we moved further down the hallway, the mold seemed to become more aggressive, spreading in thick, dark patches along the walls and floors. The air grew heavier, making it harder to breathe. We kicked open another door, our flashlights revealing more of the same. Nothing useful. "This place is a bust," Sarah muttered. "Let's keep looking," I replied, though I was starting to feel the same way. There has to be something. We continued down the corridor, our footsteps echoing in the silence. As we approached the end of the hall, something caught my eye. One door stood out, covered in black, creeping mold that seemed to pulse and writhe. Tendrils of fungus snaked out from the edges, reaching out into the hallway. "Sarah, look at this," I said. She turned to see what I was pointing at, and her eyes widened. "That's different." We approached the door cautiously as the tendrils moved and swayed. With a deep breath, we each grabbed one side of the door and pulled. It resisted for a moment before giving way, the mold snapping and tearing as we forced it open. The smell that hit us was overpowering, a mix of rot and decay that made my eyes water. Inside, our flashlights revealed a horrifying sight. At the back of the room sat several pallets with dozens of boxes of peaches each. But it was what grew from these boxes that will haunt my nightmares till my dying day. The entire back wall was consumed by a towering, monstrous fungal mass. Thick, fleshy stalks jutted out from the base, climbing nearly to the ceiling. The surface of the fungus glistened with a slimy, wet sheen, appearing almost like rotting flesh under our flashlight beams. Each stalk was covered in a mottled, sickly green and yellow hue, with patches of black mold that seemed to pulse in the dim light. Interwoven within this horrific sight were bulbous growths, each one throbbing rhythmically, as if with a heartbeat of its own. They resembled obscene, overgrown tumors, ready to burst at the slightest touch. Long, sinewy tendrils extended from the main mass, creeping over the boxes and along the floor like the fingers of some malevolent creature, seeking out any life to ensnare. The tendrils near the door twitched, slowly inching their way toward us as if aware of our presence. The air was thick with spores, glimmering in the light like tiny stars, each one a potential harbinger of decay and death. "Oh my God," Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible over the sound of our own breathing. "What is that thing?" We stood there, frozen in shock and disgust, before I slammed the door shut. "Let's get the hell out of here," I said. We hurried back down the corridor, our footsteps echoing in the oppressive silence. The lights in the facility flickered on, casting a blinding white light. I heard a bubbling, groaning noise emanate from behind the fungal door, sending a wave of nausea through my body. We met back up with Mark and Jamie in the main area and quickly told them what we saw. "Yo, that sounds sick," Jamie exclaimed. "We should blow it up. I found the chemicals in the control room, and these bad boys are ready to go," he said, holding up a pipe bomb. "Yeah," Mark agreed, his eyes alight with excitement. "We'd be doing the world a favor, getting rid of that thing." Sarah shook her head, her face pale. "No way. I'm not doing this. That thing, it's not normal. We need to get out of here and call someone who knows what they're doing." Jamie frowned. "Come on, Sarah. Don't be a buzzkill. This is a once-in-a-lifetime chance to do something epic." "Epic?" Sarah snapped. "That thing is dangerous. We don't know what we're dealing with. I'm not risking my life for some stupid joke." Mark stepped in with a grin. "All right, let's all calm down. If you're scared, you can just let the men handle it." Sarah crossed her arms. "Fine, but I'm staying here." "Suit yourself," Jamie said, shrugging. "But we're not leaving without taking care of that thing." "All right, let's do this," Mark said, looking at Jamie and me. "We'll be quick. Sarah, stay here and keep an eye out." The hallway looked completely different in the fluorescent lighting. I could see now that each vein of fungus emanated from that single door, like a spiral portal threatening to suck us in. "Let's make this quick," I whispered, glancing back at Jamie and Mark. "We light the bomb, throw it in, and get the hell out of here." Jamie nodded, holding the pipe bomb tightly in his hand. Ready when you are. We reached the door, and the tendrils of fungus seemed even more aggressive, writhing and pulsing as if aware of our presence. The air was thick with spores. On 3, I whispered, gripping the edge of the door. 1, 2, 3. We yanked the door open, the mold snapping and tearing as it gave way. The smell of rotten decay hit us again, making my eyes water. The monstrous fungal mass loomed before us, its bulbous growths throbbing rhythmically. Jamie lit the fuse and threw the bomb as hard as he could inside. It struck one of the orbs, which burst, shooting a fine mist into the air. "Run!" I shouted, slamming the door. We turned and sprinted down the hallway. The explosion sounded behind us, the shockwave lifting me off my feet and sending me tumbling to the ground. Living in a small southern town, you get used to the way things are. My parents were in the army, so we moved a lot, but now I'm staying put. I woke up around noon and got a text from Mark to meet at the cafe. The smell of slightly stale coffee and pastries greeted me as I arrived. The bell's ring seemed off, giving me a small headache. I ignored it and slid into the seat across from Mark and Jamie. "So, what's on the docket today?" I asked, stealing a donut off Jamie's plate. "Going to go to an old peach factory and get some chemicals. I need to make fireworks," Mark replied, subtly revealing some pipe bombs in his bag. Sarah walked in towards the tail end of our conversation and silently stood next to our table. The three of us glanced at each other, unsure of how to proceed. "Sarah," I finally started, "are you okay?" "Yeah," she replied. "Are you guys feeling okay?" We exchanged uneasy glances. "Yeah, we're fine," I said. After a moment, she shook her head and sat down as we continued our plans. That evening, we broke into the peach factory. We found this disgusting, gigantic fungal growth coming out of some boxes of peaches, and we blew it up with some pipe bombs. The next day, I woke up around noon and got a text from Mark to meet at the cafe. The smell of slightly stale coffee and pastries greeted me as I arrived. The bell's ring seemed off, giving me a small migraine. I ignored it and slid into the seat across from Mark and Jamie. "So, what's on the docket today?" I asked, stealing a maroon off Jamie's plate. "Gonna go to an old peach factory and get some chemicals. I need to make fireworks," Mark replied, subtly revealing some pipe bombs in his bag. Sarah walked in towards the tail end of our conversation and silently stood next to our table. The three of us glanced at each other, unsure of how to proceed. "Sarah," I finally started, "are you okay?" "Yeah," she replied. "Not really. Are you guys feeling okay?" We exchanged uneasy glances. "Yeah, we're fine," I said. After a moment, she shook her head and sat down as we continued our plans. That evening, we broke into the peach factory. We found this disgusting, gigantic fungal growth coming out of some boxes of peaches, and we blew it up with some pipe bombs. The next day, I woke up around noon and got a text from Mark to meet at the cafe. The smell of slightly stale coffee and pastries greeted me as I arrived. The bell's ring seemed off, giving me a piercing migraine. I ignored it and slid into the seat across from Mark and Jamie. "So, what's on the docket today?" I asked, stealing a bagel off Jamie's plate. "Gonna go to an old peach factory and get some chemicals. I need to make some fireworks," Mark replied, subtly revealing some pipe bombs in his bag. Sarah walked in towards the tail end of our conversation and silently stood next to our table. The three of us glanced at each other, unsure of how to proceed. "Sarah," I finally started, "are you okay?" "What's going on?" she asked, tears welling up in her eyes. I'm scared." We exchanged uneasy glances. "It's fine, Sarah. Just take a seat," I said. After a moment, she shook her head and sat down as we continued our plans. That evening, we broke into the peach factory. We found this disgusting, gigantic fungal growth coming out of some boxes of peaches, and we blew it up with some pipe bombs. The next day, I woke up around noon and got a text from Mark to meet at the cafe. The smell of slightly stale coffee and pastries greeted me as I arrived. The bell's ring seemed off. It gave me a splitting migraine. As I slid into the seat across from Mark and Jamie, I noticed Sarah outside, fixated on a bird suspended mid-flight. I went out to see her. "Are you seeing this?" she asked, her voice tinged with astonishment. "Yeah," I replied nonchalantly. "That happens all the time. Are you sure you're feeling okay?" "What the hell do you mean, am I feeling okay?" she screamed. "That bird is frozen mid-air, and you don't think anything weird is going on?" Her yelling took me aback. I didn't understand her alarm, so I shrugged it off and joined Mark inside. As we began planning our nightly excursion to the peach factory, Sarah burst through the door screaming, then vanished in a puff of smoke. "That's odd," I mused, my brow furrowed in confusion before we shrugged it off and resumed our scheming. The day after, I met Mark again at the cafe. This rhythm had become our existence. Meetings by day, adventures by night at the old peach plant. That evening followed the familiar pattern. We reveled in the thrill of hurling pipe bombs into that small enclosed room. This routine had completely engulfed our lives. Day after day at the cafe, night after night at the factory. It seemed as though this cycle was all we had ever known. Reflecting on it, I couldn't remember any other way of life. However, one thing increasingly disturbed me. The ringing of the doorbell at the cafe's entrance. Each time I entered, the sound seemed sharper, more grating. Focusing on it brought a searing pain to my head, like a needle drilling through my skull. Yet, despite the agony, I found myself obsessing over it, the sound gnawing at the edges of my sanity. One day, driven to the brink by this incessant ringing, I decided to confront it head-on. I stood by the door, letting the bell chime repeatedly. Each ring sliced through my mind, but I persisted, sweat beading on my forehead, teeth clenched in torment. As the pain crescendoed, reality shattered. I woke up to the blaring of a fire alarm, not the quaint doorbell I had imagined. The cafe was engulfed in chaos. The hallway was consumed by a sprawling fungal mass, its tendrils creeping along the walls. In the dim, flickering light, I saw Jamie, or what was left of him. Half of his skull was missing. The fungus attached grotesquely to his exposed brain, pulsating with each eerie beat of his fading heart. Mark was there too, seemingly unharmed physically, but trapped in a delusion, his eyes glazed over, a smile playing on his lips as the fungus encased him. Sarah lay collapsed by the fire alarm, her hand still on the lever. She had managed to pull it before succumbing to the spores that now clung to her body. The tendrils that had enveloped me snapped violently, each break releasing a sickening crack that echoed through the eerie silence of the hallway. An outline of my body remained imprinted in the fungal mass, a mold from which I had desperately broken free. Gritting my teeth against the pain and horror, I scrambled to Mark and Sarah. Mark was less entangled, lost in his fungal-induced stupor. I grabbed him under the arms, his body limp but alive, and dragged him across the floor. The fungus resisted, stretching like sinew before tearing away from him with wet, ripping sounds. Sarah was heavier, her body weakened but still fighting. I clasped her wrist, pulling with all my strength. The fungus clung to her, tendrils winding up her arms like ivy. With a final determined yank, the last of the tendrils snapped, freeing her. We left behind fragments of the monstrous growth clinging to her clothes. Together, we staggered out into the night air, away from the suffocating enclosure. The cool air hit our faces, harsh yet cleansing. Behind us, the fire alarm continued to blare into the night. I fumbled with my phone, hands shaking, to dial the emergency number. The call went through, and within minutes, the sound of sirens cut through the stillness of the night, growing louder as help approached. The next few days were a blur. I remember fading in and out of consciousness as nurses pumped antifungals directly into my IV, their faces blurring into the sterile environment. Once we were somewhat cognizant, the police wanted answers. One by one, we were interviewed, but we gave them nothing. I still don't know what the exact penalty is for manufacturing explosives and using them to destroy a building, but I'm guessing it's not community service. Jamie was still missing. They hadn't found any sign of him or his body. I tried to hide my tears as I knew he was already long gone. After a few weeks, I was finally cleared for visitors and got to see Sarah again. She told me that after the explosion, she ran but couldn't leave us behind. She came back, only to see us being consumed by the fungus. Try as she might, she wasn't able to free us as she felt the oppressive spores take her under. She fought back and managed to pull the fire alarm before succumbing again. The doctors told her that her allergy medication gave her some resistance to the fungus. Otherwise, she might have been a goner. Mark was never the same. We never talked about what happened, and after trying once and him flipping out, I figured it was best to let sleeping dogs lie. That summer, he moved to upstate New York to work on his dad's business. I haven't seen him since. That fall, Sarah started college at Savannah State. I still call her every now and again, but it's not like it used to be. Despite all that happened, I'm not moving again. I'm happy here, and if it's up to me, I'll die in this little town. I still work at the cafe, as a manager now. On weekends, I come in and just sit at the booth we all used to share. And I still think about Jamie from time to time. I wonder if he's dead or still stuck in his delusion, picturing the four of us sitting at our table, talking, laughing, passing the time. Sometimes, when the cafe is empty and the light is just right, I can almost see him there, his smile frozen in that moment before everything went wrong. The cafe grows quieter each day, the hum of life fading into an eerie stillness. My skin feels different, as if the air itself whispers secrets I can't quite grasp. The itching that started as a minor annoyance has intensified, becoming a constant torment. I scratch at lesions that have begun to form on my arms and legs, red and raw, with patches of green spreading beneath the surface. I've started to wear long sleeves to cover my arms and a mask to hide my purpling lips. Some nights, when closing, as I sit alone in the dim light of the cafe, the itching becomes unbearable. I claw at the lesions, feeling a dampness beneath my skin. And sometimes when I cough, I could swear I see tiny spores hanging in the air, reminiscent of the bursting nodules growing on the stalks of the monster. Occasionally, I hear the bell ring and the door open, but no one's there. I look outside into the empty night and see nothing. This went on for weeks, becoming more frequent. But one night, the door opened, and I saw Jamie standing there, the picture of health. I went to embrace him and noticed my lesions were gone, too. It was almost as if we had never gone to the peach factory. It was suddenly morning, and the light shone through the cafe. For the first time in forever, we were happy. We talked about nothing, passing the time. After what felt like hours, he told me it was time to go. But his mouth wasn't moving. I felt like I could read his thoughts, and he could read mine. We stood up as I took one last look at the cafe and headed off with him, back to the peach factory. As we walked, a strange calmness settled over me. I remember feeling like I wanted to ask if he had talked to Mark or Sarah and wondered how they were doing. But deep down, somehow, I could feel their presence, and I knew they were doing just fine. The sun was bright, the air crisp. The itching had vanished completely, replaced by an inexplicable craving for the sweetness of ripe peaches. Jamie and I shared a silent understanding, a bond deeper than any words could convey. The factory loomed ahead, its doors wide open as if inviting us in. The familiar scent of peaches and something else, something earthy and ancient, filled the air. We stepped inside, side by side, feeling at home for the first time in ages. The last thing I remember before the darkness took over was the feeling of the soft, warm peach flesh in my hand, and Jamie's voice in my head saying, "Welcome home."